Hey guys, welcome back. We have an exciting video about evolution, but really it's more about natural selection, the mechanism behind evolution.
All right, so what is evolution? Well, the definition for evolution is the development of new types of organisms from pre-existing types of organisms over time. This means new types of organisms, not just babies that are the kids of the parents. We're talking about, and also evolution takes place over a long period of time, not just like, 30 years.
No, it's millions upon millions upon millions of time. When we say time, we mean time.
Yeah, time, many generations.
Back in the day, 1800s, which in all honesty, in my opinion, isn't that long ago, it was just becoming accepted. People were just now getting information like, oh wait, the Earth is billions of years old. People thought it was way younger before that. And then they thought that before this time, they thought if there was an animal on the planet today, it must have always been there. And if there was an animal on the planet today, it will always be there. Like they maybe never seen a dinosaur skeleton at the time, or they just thought these were mythical dinosaurs or dragons, so like they were fake. A lot of people thought the early dinosaur skeletons were totally fake.
Yeah, and then really I think what started this is the first time that there's really any recorded history of them noticing that there weren't any more of a specific organism. I think the dodo bird went extinct in the 1800s.
Right,
I mean, that's like the first thing that they ever noticed went extinct. So that was sort of what shifted that frame of thinking.
The first guy is the Frenchman, and let me clear my throat, say it kind of right. Jean-Baptiste Lemaire.
Lemaire.
You gotta say like you got more phlegm. Lemaire. Anyway, he was a biologist, again, kind of like Aristotle. He was smart, he had a good idea, but it ended up being totally wrong. He thought that organisms could change within their lifetime. His classic example is the giraffe you see. He thought that there were all these short-necked giraffes, and they saw the leaves up high, and they would just reach for them, and every day try to get the leaves, and after a day their neck grew a millimeter, and after 20 years their neck grew 5 feet, and then if their neck grew 5 feet, they would have babies, and their babies would have that 5-foot neck. It'd be like if Mr. Carnstead, buff as he is, were to work out every day, and then when he had a child, the baby would come out with huge Jersey Shore type biceps. We know that's unfortunately not the case. So thank you, Lamarck, for your ideas that things change over time, which was the new idea, but the way that he thought they changed was just wrong.
Yeah. Along came Charles Darwin, who was maybe the most important scientist in early evolutionary thought.
Darwin, he didn't actually come out and say evolution. That's a word he didn't coin. But he had observations that some people were like, oh wait, let's talk about a species changing. He went around the world on his boat, the Beagle, which is fun because it's a little dog, and he found out that all around his world, all in his travels, he was like, there are these similar type species. Like you go to Australia, you see this giant bird called the emu. You go to Africa, you see another giant bird called the ostrich. So it's like, hey, maybe they are different, maybe they are similar. Maybe one day there was this Pangea idea, if you've heard of that. Maybe all the birds were big there, they split off and they changed. He also found that on this one little chain of islands, the Galapagos Islands, they're very famous now because of his work, he found there were these birds, and they all had like a finch bird body, but they all had a different face, like a big beak or a thin beak or like a ratchet beak. And the one that ate nuts had the big beak, the little beaked one would, what would that eat?
Well, if they had a thin little beak, they'd be able to dig in and get insects from the hills, yeah.
And also something, again, with the extinctions, he found that there were fossils. Not everyone could understand what fossils were before then. He thought that over time, these fossils were actually animals that lived way back in the past, and he found some intermediate or interesting fossils, and I maybe used the word incorrectly, but like this thing at the bottom, you have the armadillo, which is a living little thing in like New Mexico, and up at the top, this is called Glyptodon. They look the same. Does that mean they're related? We didn't know. This thing's been extinct for millions of years, but this thing's like as big as a little Volkswagen car, but it has about the same shape as the armadillo. He thought maybe there's something to that.
All right, so Mr. Lencioni mentioned his study on finches, and this was kind of the most famous of the things he really talked about. He went to the Galapagos Islands. He did this study, and like Mr. Lencioni kind of said, you had different areas of the Galapagos where on some islands there are a lot more insects for food. There are some islands that there are a lot more nuts that were available. There's actually a lot of different little ecosystems on the Galapagos Islands because they're volcanic islands, and some of these islands haven't been around all that long, at least in terms of geological time. So the birds in different areas had different beaks, and it depended on what kind of food was available. And he put together the idea of natural selection, which we're about to talk about. Now, the famous book that he wrote was called On the Origin of Species by Natural Selection. He actually, on the origin of species by the means of natural selection. He didn't actually publish this book until years after his research. He did not do this immediately. There's a bit of controversy that went along with it, and he just wasn't sure of himself right away, so he kind of held on to his work for a while. But one idea he came up with, and this sort of goes into natural selection, is what's called descent with modification. He guessed that of all the 13 species of finches he saw in the Galapagos, all of them came from a common descendant that first came to the Galapagos Islands. Then over time, if there was a finch that went over to this island that had all the different nuts, and it had babies, the one that had the larger beak that could crack the nuts easier, that one was going to eat the most food, it was going to survive, and it was going to have the most offspring and maybe pass that down. So what happened was the descent part means it had offspring, and the modifications means little things happen, little mutations that might get passed down. And this is what's called?
This is natural selection. This is the vocab term. Do you have a test coming up on this? I believe you do. Is this a term on it? Hey, I guess you'll find out when you take the test. The process by which organisms that are most suited for their environment will survive and reproduce the most successfully. So natural selection says you need to do two things in order to survive. You need to be able to, eat and avoid predators if you're like a little bug or something, and you must also, just living isn't enough, you must also reproduce, because even though you might be the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, if you never had any kids, your DNA and your genes die with you.
Mm-hmm. There are 4 factors that cause natural selection to actually happen and therefore affect the gene pool of a population.
The gene pool is all the DNA in that population.
Yeah. The first factor that needs to exist is overproduction. To simplify this, what this means is there are more organisms in a population there than can be supported. So let's say you have an island and you have 500 birds, okay? Suddenly there's a drought and there's only enough food for 300 people. You have what's called, or 300 birds. That's what you would call overproduction, okay? There are too many organisms for that environment. The next thing that needs to exist,
there needs to be genetic variation within that population. Now, even though that picture had all the birds and they looked the same, but if you really got up close and personal to those birds, you might notice one had a little bit longer wings, one might have had a little longer beak. Just like within any species, there's these little variations. That's the main thing there. The key vocab word on this slide is called an adaptation. That's an inherited characteristic, meaning you get it from your parents and you can pass it along to your children through your DNA. But this characteristic, this physical thing, allows you to survive better. So it needs to be something, physical, like a stronger heart gene, or a gene for these look like deer, and maybe some of them froze during the winter. So an adaptation for more fur.
That was mean.
I know.
The third thing that needs to exist, and this is typically what happens when you have an overpopulation, is a struggle to survive, also known as competition. Individuals need to fight each other, or compete could even just mean they're racing to get food. Okay, there's only a limited amount of food. They're trying to see who can get the most food the fastest. Okay, there are different forms of competition. All right, now in this picture, what do you think is going to give? I'm going to pretend you're my student. What do you think is going to give these rams an advantage in this little battle?
Well,
they're actually fighting over mates in this one, I'm pretty sure.
Geez, Mr. Carnstead, could that be the deer with bigger horns?
I think it would be.
Thanks.
So there's a limited amount, and actually this happens in populations, is there's more males than females, only a certain amount can reproduce, so they're going to compete for their mates. In this case, the ones that could fight better are going to be the ones that reproduce. And that kind of leads into the fourth one.
And after all of this said and done, they have differential reproduction. What happens is not everybody's going to be reproducing, even though these cats all look like the same. Some of them have a better trait, and they are going to be reproducing more. The key term that, if we haven't mentioned before, is fitness.
Mm-hmm. That's coming up.
That'll be coming up. So it's showing you there's slight differences in reproduction. Anything else?
Well, this seems kind of obvious that, oh yeah, well, the ones that'll compete will be the ones that reproduce, but this doesn't happen all the time. Like, for example, do you know how female peacocks pick their mates? Do you think they pick out the fastest ones?
No, they pick out the peacock with the brightest plumage.
Okay, and like the biggest tail, right?
And the biggest tail.
Does that actually help the male survive?
No, it probably makes them like a big sign for predators, like, hey guys, please eat me.
Exactly. So the reason why you put in this number 4, although it seems like the 3 things before add together lead to differential reproduction, sometimes the fact that you can survive better than the others doesn't mean you're going to reproduce more. So you actually have to be, like, it has to be a population that your reproduction is based off of how well you survive, not just some other factor. And this was Mr. Lencioni's word, so I'll let him take it.
The word, I was dying to say it. It's called, you've maybe heard of the word survival of the fittest, right? So when you think, oh yeah, fittest, most sit-ups, most push-ups, fastest, you know. Fitness, and this is good for me because I've put on a few pounds over the holidays, doesn't always mean biggest, fastest, strongest. It does a lot of the times, but fitness just means that you're surviving and that you can have babies. So example would be if you're let's look at those cats. Maybe those cats, they were gray. Maybe those cats were really fast and strong and they could catch a lot of mice and eat and survive. That's great, but what if they went to an island that's bright red in color? They would stick out like a sore thumb. All the mice would see them coming from a mile away. But if there was a bright red cat, it might be a little slower or whatever, but if it could sneak up better on the mice, it would be able to reproduce more. Even though it might not have been stronger or faster, it could hide better.
Yeah, so an organism's ability to survive isn't always based on how physically gifted they are. It's, could be intelligence even sometimes in the wild. All right, so that's all for definitions. We're going to end this with a little demonstration of natural selection.
Please play along at home. It'll help you to internalize the information. For this demonstration of natural selection, we are going to be using these really well-made butterfly cutouts. This is the blue butterfly. It is smaller and a little bit quicker. This is the white butterfly. It's larger and a little bit slower. Now, in the natural forest, which is this green background, they're both flying around. The blue one's faster, the white one's slower. Which one do you think might get eaten by predators? Let's find out. Oh my goodness, did you see that Canis lupus? Did you guess the white butterflies? I bet you did. Therefore, these blue butterflies could still live on and they could still have their blue butterfly babies. This means these blue butterflies have high fitness. Let's say these two butterflies, always back, migrated further north, an area where there might still be some snowfall. Same two butterflies, and they're going to be going around in this environment. Which one do you think is going to live?
I only see blue butterflies.
Canis lupus, did you guess the blue butterfly was going to get eaten? I bet you did. In this example, even though the slower white butterfly was slower and whiter, it could not be seen. Therefore, this is the only one left over. It had higher fitness, even though it wasn't faster, it had the right color. Therefore, if you go to this environment, you might find more of this color butterfly. Thank you for your cooperation, and have a great science-filled day.